Hello, welcome back to Harbury Kids. My name is Isabel Joby, and I will be doing a book review on Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Oliver Twist is a classic novel set in the mid-1800s, written by Charles Dickens. The story is about an orphan boy called Oliver Twist who struggles through life. Oliver Twist is a young orphan boy who is under the care of the parish workhouse. After asking for extra food, Oliver is sent out to Mr. Soberry, the coffin maker. However, after a conflict with Noah, Mr. Soberry's worker, Oliver escapes to London. There, he meets the artful dodger who brings him to a criminal, Fagin. Oliver is tricked by the group and is forced to steal a handkerchief from an old man. Oliver is caught. However, the old man pities him and takes Oliver under his care. The old man is called Mr. Brownlow, and Oliver is treated like his son. Oliver is asked to complete an errand for Mr. Brownlow. However, on the way, he is kidnapped by Nancy and is brought back to Fagin. Oliver is made to steal from a house with Bill Sikes, but the mission fails and the house takes Oliver in. Oliver is cared by the mistress of the house, Mrs. Maylie, and he tells them his story. After several weeks, Oliver begins to recover, though he feels sad because he was not able to tell Mr. Brownlow what has happened to him. However, when Oliver tries to visit Mr. Brownlow, he discovers that Mr. Brownlow has gone to the West Indies. Mrs. Maylie and Miss Rose then take him to the countryside, and Oliver and the ladies have become great friends. Suddenly, Rose gets a high and dangerous fever. Rose almost has no chance of recovery. However, at the brink of death, she begins to recover. Mr. Giles and Harry Maylie comes to visit Rose. Harry declares to his mother that he loves Rose. However, Mrs. Maylie tells him that Rose's status might ruin his. One day, Oliver falls asleep and has a nightmare about Fagin and a man whispering about him. Oliver wakes up and sees them, but they disappear quickly. Harry and Giles rush over to Oliver and try to find Fagin and the stranger. However, they fail. Mr. Bumble has married a woman called Corny, and when Mr. Bumble goes to the pub, he meets a strange man. This man asks Mr. Bumble about Old Sally. However, Old Sally has passed away. Mr. Bumble replies he does know someone, and they agree to meet the next evening. The man's name is Monks. During a storm, Mr. and Mrs. Bumble meet Monks in a decaying building. Mrs. Bumble relates how Old Sally robbed Oliver's mother. Inside, he finds a wedding ring and 2 locks of hair. The name Agnes is engraved on the ring, along with a blank for a surname. Monks ties the locket to a weight and drops it into the river. Bill Sikes is ill with a fever. Nancy nurses him anxiously, despite his surly attitude. Sikes demands that Fagin give him money. Fagin is about to delve in his store of cash when Monks arrives and asks to speak to Fagin alone. The 2 men leave for a secluded room, but Nancy follows them and eavesdrops. After Monks departs, Fagin gives Nancy the money. Perturbed by what she has heard, she dashes into the streets and away from Sikes' residence before returning to deliver the money. Sensing something, he demands that she sit by him. After he falls asleep, she hurries to a hotel in a wealthy area. She begs the servant to allow her to speak to Mrs. Maylie, who is staying there. Nancy confesses to Rose that she is the one who kidnapped Oliver on his errand for Mr. Brownlow. She relates that she heard Monks tell Fagin that he is Oliver's brother. Monks wants Oliver's identity to remain unknown so that Monks himself can claim the family's full inheritance. Monks would kill Oliver if he could do so without endangering himself. Before leaving, Nancy informs Rose that she can be found on London Bridge between 11 and 12 every Sunday night, in case further testimony is needed. Nancy meets Mr. Brownlow and Rose on London Bridge and leads them to an empty spot. They hope to catch Monks and force the truth about Oliver from him. Nancy's description of Monks startles Mr. Brownlow, who appears to know him. Noah hurries to Fagin's house. Fagin and Noah relate the details of Nancy's trip. In a rage, Sikes rushes home and beats Nancy to death while she begs for mercy. In the morning, Sikes flees London, seeing suspicious looks everywhere. Sikes decides to return to London and hide. Mr. Brownlow has captured Monks and brought him to the Brownlow home. Monk's real name is Edward Leeford. Brownlow was a good friend of Monk's father, Mr. Leeford. Mr. Leeford was a young man when his family forced him to marry a wealthy older woman. The couple eventually separated but did not divorce, and Edward and his mother went to Paris. Meanwhile, Mr. Leeford fell in love with Agnes Fleming, who became pregnant with Oliver. Mr. Leeford left a portrait of Agnes in Brownlow's care, while he went to Rome to claim his inheritance. Mr. Leeford's wife, hearing of this good fortune, travelled with Edward to meet him there. However, in Rome, Mr. Leeford took ill and died. Brownlow reports that he knows that Monk's mother burned Mr. Leeford's will, so Mr. Leeford's newfound fortune fell to his wife and son. After his mother died, Monks lived in the West Indies on their ill-gotten fortune. Brownlow, remembering Oliver's resemblance to the woman in the portrait, had gone there to find Monks after Oliver was kidnapped. Meanwhile, the search for Sikes continued. Toby Crackit and Tom Chitling flee to an island after Fagin and Noah are captured by the authorities. Sikes' dog shows up at the house that serves as their hiding place. Sikes arrives soon after. Charlie Bates arrives and attacks the murderer, calling for the others to help him. The search party and an angry mob arrive demanding justice. Sikes climbs onto the roof with a rope, intending to lower himself to escape in the midst of the confusion. However, he loses his balance when he imagines that he sees Nancy's eyes before him. The rope catches around his neck, and he falls to his death with his head in an accidental noose. Oliver and his friend travel to the town of his birth, with Monks in tow, to meet Mr. Grimwig. There, Monks reveals that he and his mother found a letter and a will after his father's death, both which they destroyed. The will stated that, if his illegitimate child was a girl, she should inherit the estates unconditionally. If it were a boy, he would inherit the estates only if he committed no illegal or guilty act. Otherwise, Monks and his mother would receive the fortune. Upon learning of his daughter's shameful involvement with a married man, Agnes's father left his hometown and changed his family's name. Agnes ran away to save her family the shame of her condition, and her father died soon thereafter of a broken heart. His other small daughter was taken in by a poor couple who died soon after. Mrs. Maylie took pity on the little girl and raised her as her niece. That child is Rose. Harry has vowed to live his life as a poor clergyman. Knowing that she no longer stands in the way of Harry's ambition, Rose agrees to marry him. Fagin is sentenced to death for his many crimes. On his last night alive, Brownlow and Oliver visit him in his jail to find out the location of papers verifying Oliver's identity, which Monks had entrusted to Fagin. Noah is pardoned because he testifies against Fagin. Charlie turns to an honest life and becomes a successful grazier, a person who feeds cattle before they are taken to the market. Brownlow arranges for Monk's property to be divided between Monks and Oliver. Monks travels to the New World, where he squanders his share of the inheritance and lives a sordid life that lands him in prison, where he dies. Brownlow adopts Oliver as his son. He, Losberne, and Grimwig take up their residence near the rural church over which Harry presides. Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was a famous English writer who was born on the 7th February 1812 and died on the 9th June 1870. Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is the main character of the book, who is an orphan child. After asking for extra food from the beadle, he is sent out to another place. Oliver struggles through many misfortunes, a life full of thievery, until he is taken by the kind Mr. Brownlow. However, this does not last for long, as Fagin, a thief, tries to kidnap him. Oliver Twist. Character analysis. Oliver Twist is a young boy whose face resembles his mother. Despite being treated cruelly and unfairly, he has a kind and innocent personality. The family tree. In the Maylie's family, we have Harry Maylie and Rose Fleming, who is adopted by Mrs. Maylie. In the Fleming's family, we have Rose Fleming, who is the youngest daughter, and Agnes Fleming, who is married to Edward Leeford. Agnes Fleming has a son called Oliver Twist, who is the main character of this story. Edward Leeford is married to Mrs. Leeford, and they have a child called Edward Leeford, who is also known as Monks. My personal opinions. The genres of this book is novel, fiction, and social novel. I would say that this book is an enjoyable book, as it is interesting and thrilling. The publisher of this book is Richard Bentley. And thank you for listening.